special power. Everyone has something they're passionate about. Everyone is a subject matter expert. Here at Nerdmasters, we help you share your expertise. In our digital world, we Toastmasters must master basic communication technologies in conjunction with speaking and leadership skills. We formed the Nerdmasters Advanced Club to expand our understanding of technology so we can better serve our clubs and our communities. We are nerdy Toastmasters, enthusiastically exploring the intersection of technology, leadership, communication, and nerdly pop culture. Welcome to the Nerdcasters podcast.
Game begin.
Hello and welcome to Nerdcasters, Toastmasters podcast based from Nerdmasters. Tonight we are going to do a episode on the formation of Nerdmasters as part of our trilogy of getting to know the club, the organization, the formation, the culture, and everything about Nerdmasters, the club. Tonight I have with me guests James O'Farron, Kyle Hall, and Robin Lee. Thank you all for coming. I guess the first question out of the bag is, well, what started Nerdmasters? What was the catalyst that began the Nerdmasters journey?
One word: COVID.
You may have heard, long ages ago of this storm of pestilence sweeping across the world, launching many things into catastrophe. We were one of those catastrophes, you could say.
The slightly longer answer is District 30. Well, COVID hit everywhere, and like everybody else, we had to isolate. We could not meet in person. And this was right at the start of our club contest season. Clubs had contests a few clubs that had contests in January and February. And in March came and we were like, can't meet. And for some people, those contests are important. It is an important tradition within Toastmasters. So the question was, how do we do these contests? How do we keep it going when we can't get in the room together? And a group of us, the district asked me and James and some other people who were known to be technically savvy to pull together a bunch of nerds to figure this out and help our clubs get through the area and division and district contests. And that's how we started.
Oh.
There's a general call and summons for the nerds of the district, and there was another District 2, I believe, had been trying some similar stuff out, so we picked some of their brains and sent some double agents over to kind of do some industrial espionage to steal their secrets. And
Michael Dugan and Linda Rothman were really helpful. Huge
help. Yes. So, loving the bits.
Big call out to
and Linda actually joined the Nerdmasters. Never could get Michael Dugan too. We visited a couple times, I believe. But we were meeting weekly to coordinate and pull together, and we had a very clear mission objective, but we tended to veer from it pretty regularly. I mean, you get all the nerds, all the Toastmasters nerds in District 32, put them in a room together. What do you think is going to happen? All the rabbits in the world are going to run all over the place, and we're going to chase them all.
How many of there were there of you?
Like 11 of us, maybe 12.
At least. Some of our meetings went up because we had some of the district leadership come in, and we had guests as we were trying to sort things out and figure things out. And some people attended some of them and not others. But initially it was, 11 or 12, I think under 15. But then as we kind of got underway and built up steam and started really thinking about when this is over, once we save the world and everything, what are we going to do with ourselves? And we realized that we didn't really want to stop meeting. So we wanted to create a club out of it. And when we started talking about that, well, then that opened up the whole options. They weren't just nerds who wanted to help the district. Now they were just nerds who just came out of the woodwork. We're like, oh, cool, a nerd club. We don't want to do that.
Yep.
And so it quickly bloomed to over 20 people who are regularly hanging out with us and doing stuff together. And It took a while to get all of the signatures on paper.
Yeah, it always does.
Paperwork. Yes, paperwork. That was a challenge. Because it was Kyle, you, and Michael were the club
We were the club sponsors.
sponsors. That's the word, right? And then I and Robin were the mentors. That we kind of all were there doing all the same stuff. So we just divvied out the titles as it worked as we needed for our projects for getting DTMs and such like. But we were all pitching in. There was a lot of really great people back then who were putting a lot of weight in. There's Robert Towner, John Stopchick. You can't forget them. They were huge impacts at the beginning there. I think Eric Mueling was there pretty close to the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Angela Ritchie.
Linda, obviously. Yep. And then when did you come along, Merlin?
I came along right as you guys were chartering.
Okay.
Gotcha. That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yep. That makes sense. You quickly became a standby. You and your voices and your ideas and your virtual backgrounds and your table topics quickly became one of the icons of the club in so many ways. And we had like people coming in. There was an inflection point. I remember this because this was what really actually I think shaped and defined our club and its culture and made it possible to be as great as it was. There was a point right at the beginning as when we were making our club and we were like forming. We were thinking about the club mission and what was going to go into the trailer video and all this kind of stuff. But we were putting together that nerdy icebreakers, right? That meeting just full of icebreakers, right? So everyone's going to share what their nerdoms were. And we want everybody to contribute. And there were a lot of members. I think Joyce, you might have been one of them. I don't remember. I know Carolyn was one of them, and a few other ones were like. I know Don Shaw was one of them as well. Who are like, well, I don't really identify as a nerd. Like you guys like, loving all this pop culture stuff. We like all these computery things, and that's just not me, right? I mean, Dawn's a crazy nerd. Like she literally runs a international sci-fi convention. I mean, that's as I mean, come on.
That's an uber nerd.
That's crazy. That's uber nerd, right? That's crazy. But then you also have people like Eric Mueling, who builds computers when he was 12 for a science fair project. I mean, from scratch, back before people do what a computer was. So we had this wide range of people who like had crazy nerd cred. So there's some element of intimidation of people like, well, what voice do I have in this space, right? But we emphasized and clarified that for us, nerdiness is just curiosity. Right? It's having a devotion to curiosity, wanting to learn, being interested for the sake of being interested. And we're not gatekeeping. We're not like setting these bars of like, revoking your nerd card if you aren't knowledgeable enough, right? We don't kick you out of the room if you can't recite pi to 200 digits. I mean, it's cool if you can do that. We'll applaud you if you do. You don't have to, right?
Or quote Star Trek.
Good.
Or
know all the episodes of Star Trek. Right. Like, all of these things are all parts of these different people, the nerddoms, and we're not going to like war between Star Trek and Star Wars. We'll tease each other, but we're not going to start a war over it. At least not yet, not a real one. And so people were like, oh, okay. And so like Carolyn did a talk on her tea and how she liked tea. And Dawn talked about her model horses. Right. And then there are people who at that meeting were guests. And they had been on the fence wondering if they should join because they love the culture, they love the community. They weren't sure, am I a nerd enough to join Nerdmasters? That was the question in their mind. We didn't put that question in their minds. That was their thought, right? Because there's this elitist status attached to the word nerd. Like people think of elite and the connection with that, which I mean, Bill Gates and everybody, it's like, we the worm has turned. We are no longer the bullied ones. Unfortunately, we're often known as the bullies, which is really sad. We want to kind of counter that narrative. And so we had this meeting, and afterwards people were saying, wow, I can fit into that. Yeah. I get that. You guys are actively celebrating everybody's nerddoms, and that's beautiful. And I feel accepted. I feel included And they suddenly started identifying as nerds. They started learning and growing, and it changed how they related to their own journey of growth and discovery. And that, I think, was beautiful. And that's what when it really clicked for me, the potential and power of what Nerdmasters can be, was that particular transformation. And that we cemented as part of our identity.
What was was there a difference between the proto before chartered Nerdmasters and after?
Yeah.
Well, so
there was more chaos before.
There was a fair amount of chaos before, but before we definitely had a mission, and it was a time-sensitive mission. It was figure this thing out so that we can help clubs do our areas do a Zoom contest and do a division contest, and and what we had to do was we had to go in and do it ourselves, and sometimes it didn't work, so it was like 2 or 3 of us would meet online later to try breakout rooms and figure out how breakout room worked, so that we could then do it right the next time and come back and teach the rest of the group. It was very definitely focused. Not that our little nerd meetings were that focused. We do tend to talk in circles sometimes.
It's fun that way.
Yeah. But when we decided to become a club, part of our club culture was we're still serving the district. So we still had that role of not necessarily being the Zoom masters for all the contests, but teaching people to be Zoom masters and teaching people how to use technology. So we still had that service role, but we also had a celebration of our differences, a celebration of our nerddoms, which has been a big part of this club's culture, and I really appreciate it.
Sounds like a part of that was from the beginning too. You all had to get along a little bit and understand that you all had it was sci-fi, regardless of whether it was Star Trek or Star Wars.
Right. Yep. Yeah. One of the things that I really enjoyed, I heard this multiple times. We would have a meeting, and we'd put it on Eventbrite, do a little bit of marketing, and we'd have guests show up. And multiple times I've heard people go, "I have found my people."
You heard that a lot.
Yeah. And when you hear somebody say that, I can relate, because I've been doing role-playing games for 30 plus years, and very, very rarely have I ever talked about it in a Toastmasters club. Because
I tried. It didn't go over well.
Well, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of background there. There's a lot of backstory that you need to give somebody in order to then give them a speech which makes sense to them. And it's like,
yep.
It's one of the most common things in the US is somebody using baseball as a metaphor in a speech. And that works for a lot of people, but not me.
Yeah.
Because I don't know baseball at all. And I have tried using role-playing games as a metaphor in a speech. And it's like, no, people don't get it.
No inside baseball for you. Mm-hmm. Robin, what was your experience of the early pre?
Well, I was not in the pre-group. I came in once they fairly early into the idea that a club was forming, and found it very interesting that nerds of all different areas would be able to come together, and it feels like it's our people, even though I'm totally not a gamer. I have no games on my computer, even though I bought a gaming computer for the graphics card for video editing. All games are removed, And so, but to be able to feel comfortable sharing my areas of nerddom and being able to laugh at the jokes, except for the ones that I totally don't get, and totally be fine with that. It's and that really And to be able to, it's been
Kyle
really
has such an infectious, jolly laugh. It doesn't matter if you get the joke or not. You have to laugh anyway.
to be able to engage in this much fun with the leadership of the district has been a really interesting thing to me, because I've realized they're all just real people, just like any of us are.
They are.
And this has been, well, I've noticed, but only at Nerdmasters, at least they're, it's like the fun part of a district leader who is pretty by the script when you see them on your all other meetings, right? In this meeting, their uniqueness and their fun can come out. And so that actually had a big impact on me, just as far as getting to know district leadership and be able to hang out with people from throughout District 32 in both Washington and Alaska. That has actually been one of my most fun parts, to get to know the Alaskan people more through this, and be able to hear about the Alaska earthquake and various different interesting stories that we've gotten to hear in this club. I absolutely love it, and I definitely want us to come together as Nerdmasters, throughout time, whatever happens to the club.
Time immemorial in the future. Because technically time immemorial is referencing the past, but there's actually a particular date to time immemorial. It's a legal term in British common law, but I digress.
But if all times exist simultaneously in the quantum world, you can access it at any point. That would be one of my areas.
Nerdmasters will never be gone. 1189, specifically before the reign of Richard the First. 11 is the legal limit for time immemorial, because it's time beyond legal memory.
Interesting.
Very specific, yes. It was originally needed to be defined as a limit for bringing certain kinds of lawsuits. Like, that's too old. We don't have enough data. So I had to look that one up, because I always find that one fascinating.
So Kyle mentioned doing a lot of. So Kyle mentioned doing a lot of role playing when he was before he started Nerdmasters and Toastmasters. James, what was life like for you before Nerdmasters, before the pandemic?
As far as my nerdiness expression in Toastmasters, I empathize with Kyle with the challenges with letting all of myself into Toastmasters, because you have to respect your audience, right? And knowing how that works has always been a challenge for me, because I grew up homeschooled, and so my gauge on what words are obscure and esoteric is completely out of whack. So, I mean, my 4-year-old brother was using sesquipedalian words like sesquipedalian at age 4. So we just have no clue how the rest of the world operates. No frame of reference whatsoever. So it took me a while to kind of dial that in so that I could communicate to people at their level, which is very important for skilled communication. So it took me a while to dial that in. Some of the challenges I ran into that was also with content, because I was interested in things like, I'm just interested in all the things. Not everybody is.
James, just to let you know that you're not the only one out there. When I was in elementary school, some kids called me the professor because of my vocabulary. And
I love it.
One of the neighbors across the street from us told his kids not to play with my older brother because he was gay. And he knew he was gay because he liked to read.
Oh, weird. What the heck? It's so weird.
Yeah.
That is
Yeah.
such a weird
Yeah.
connection. That's
Yeah.
weird.
Yeah.
Wow. I was at a boys' home and for a few months, and a lot of the other guys in there were perturbed by my use of such words as perturbed. I remember I was walking with one of them, and I was really feeling in a pensive mood, and I wanted some good intellectual repartee. And so I asked him, do you have it? I don't want to be polite. I didn't want to just dump all this weighty thought on him at once. He wasn't ready for it. Maybe he's on his own tangent. But are you in a philosophical mood? Just to see if he was in the mood for a philosophical conversation. And he looked at me like I proposed punching his mother or something. And we got into the van. Like, he didn't answer me. I was like, I don't know what I said. I don't know. Maybe evidently he's not. Or he's in a deeper philosophical mood than I am. Anyway, we get in the van. And you know what he asked me? I was like, no, what? Like, do you know what philosophical means? Out of 15 guys in the van, none of them knew what could give a definition. I was like, I am in the wrong place. So over time, they actually wanted to pass a rule that no one could use any syllables or any words over 2 syllables. And I kept trying to tell them, it's not the length of the word, it's the obscurity of the word. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh man. Anyway, so because confound is a 2-syllable word, but misunderstand is a lot longer. And people misunderstand, but they'll get confounded with confound. Anyway, so I've run into this problem a lot, but it's not just that; it's the content. I did a 2-part speech in my CC manual with hand-drawn graphs and illustrations about a subject that I was really passionate about and really fascinated by and really excited by. So it was a passionately given series of speeches, really excellently done. I'm still proud of those speeches. The problem was the content. The focus of it was on the decomposition of uranium to lead in zircon crystals and helium diffusion therefrom. I got so many nodding heads and people would say, like, man, really well given speech. I didn't understand a word of it, but a really great speech. So, all right, I need to tone things back a bit. So in Nerdmasters, though, I suddenly had this space where even if people didn't get it, if people weren't if that wasn't their cup of tea, literally in Carolyn's case, possibly, but like if they weren't really engaged in that, maybe they just don't they like sci-fi, maybe they are only computer nerds, or somebody that are only pop culture and they don't like computers, right? You can give a speech and talk about something that you are passionate about and interested in, and they will be interested in it for your sake. Right? They will go the extra mile to look up the words and put them in chat and engage in chat to add kind of that glossary. Because that's one of our cultures that we started doing, was people could use words, pop the meaning in chat, or somebody else would engage in chat and answer.
And James just froze.
He froze because he stopped talking.
Yeah. So we
Am I back now?
We lost
Yep,
you for
you're
about
back.
25 seconds.
We know you
25
froze
seconds.
because you stopped talking.
Oh no, it says my internet connection is unstable. That is very strange.
Uh-oh.
But yeah, you guys all froze too, so that's probably what happened. So where did I get frozen?
Well, you were in the middle of explaining that you could give a talk with those
Yes.
30-year words, and people here would be willing to look them up, or other people would pop the
Right.
definition in the chat to terms. One of the things, though, I think because everyone has been in Toastmasters for a while, and it's an advanced club, the quality of the speeches are already, they're past you can bore people with your topic. Our intent is to make our area of nerddom so exciting and interesting that people learn and they have fun doing it. And that's one of the things that across every meeting the meetings have been interesting. We've always learned something from every speech, and in a fun way, so they're not dry nerddoms. We have a lot of fun in the Nerdmasters culture.
Indubitably. Which I use unironically. I actually did not say that to make a joke. I normally use that word in regular parlance.
But of course.
Not incontrovertibly, and forsooth. I use all three of those regularly.
Yeah, so I don't need to look that up and put it into chat.
No, you're fine. Let the reader understand. I mean the hearer.
What do you think that Zoom has done for Toastmasters?
That's a good question.
I think there are a lot of people who would say, what has Zoom done to Toastmasters? There are a lot of clubs that folded. When COVID hit and we had to go online, there are a lot of people who just said, nope, not doing it, going away. And the population of Toastmasters, I think, dropped something like 10 or 20%. There are clubs who have struggled and are still struggling. There are other clubs that have thrived. Nerdmasters thrived. Swim Club has been thriving. And Swim Club is now hybrid, but because we thrived when we were online, and that meant we got international members. So now we're going to be hybrid forever because the little dinky small town Swim Club now has members from Taipei, Saudi Arabia, multiple members from Saudi Arabia, South Korea.
What is the population of Swim?
About 5,000.
5,000?
Yeah. Little dinky small town,
I almost thought you meant the population of Squim, the Toastmasters Club. You said 5,000. I've got a lot of people in the Toastmasters Club.
No. We have 30 members. We have 30 members in our club.
Wow.
So
That's a big club.
yeah, it's a healthy club.
That's impressive. What were you at pre-COVID?
Pre-COVID, we were, I think we were just under 20. We had been at 20. We lost a couple of members, and yeah.
I will note that the local club here that I'm a member of here in Fargo, Cass County, had been struggling before COVID, mid-teens or so, right? Low attendance and whatnot. But then they stayed open during COVID in person and allowed hybrid, right?
Mm-hmm.
None of the other clubs in the area did. So everybody went to that club, and there are people who are wanting and craving human contact went to that club.
Sure.
So they actually thrived during COVID for the opposite reason. Interestingly.
Wow.
Because they're the ones who actually stayed open all the way through.
Okay.
Yeah. They made it work somehow.
Yeah.
And so they actually thrived and stayed open because everybody else was shut down. They were just stubborn that way, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I mean, to have the fortitude to go against the grain, and
which of course it's Fargo, North Dakota, and not hardly anybody really shut down us. We weren't really all that impacted.
And if you're not getting a lot of people coming through, nobody to pass you stuff.
Not as much. We're a flyover state. We like to stay invisible.
But the thing is, the thing is, if they were going to stay in person during COVID, they had to be willing to go to the extra work to find a larger space so people can distance, to wear masks, to deal with that. They had to go the extra step to do that.
It took a lot of work.
Right. And other clubs went the other way. They said, oh, good, we have to go online. We're going to go the extra step to learn this. One of the things the Swim Club did, we had a couple of senior members who were not comfortable on their computers. And we said, okay, why don't one of us come over and we'll get you up on Zoom and show you how to work it. We'll mask up and come over and visit. We'll get you up on Zoom and show you how to do it. And they're never going to be a Zoom master for a meeting, but they could get online and participate and give speeches and evaluations and whatnot. And so we didn't leave anybody behind, but it took extra work.
Yeah. And that's really what it kind of comes down to, is that success in any context for community takes work. It takes a lot of work. You need multiple dedicated people, at least 3, really, to have a healthy community. You need 3 dedicated. You can have people who are kind of haphazard and kind of floating along and coming when they're able to. Beyond, though, you need at least 3 core, this is on their front burner, to make it really work and click, no matter what you're doing, whether in person or online. I don't know whether it takes more work or less online or in person. It probably depends on what you're doing, but it needs work regardless.
Yeah.
What would you say is the difference between online and in person?
There's a lot of differences. This is something that I study professionally to help people with, engagement of their employees and things like that. It's specifically harder, and it becomes more obvious in context with hybrid or distributed companies where you have people on site but in multiple locations and they're communicating with each other online. What you'll have, I'm using this in way of example to kind of show what the challenges, how stark challenges can become. You'll end up with a class system, because when you're online, you have a limited number of senses and you don't have a shared space. And these limit the traditional ways that we have operated to connect humanly with each other. So it's kind of like we're drinking an ocean through a straw. There's a limited bandwidth to connect to each other's humanity. So we're naturally, by default, dehumanized to a degree, right? There's just less to connect to, which means you have to lean into it and put more effort in order to connect as much. You have to pay more attention to the content. You have to push and pull a lot more. You have to amp your energy up. Just like if you're talking, casually across the table with somebody, with one person, you can just kind of have a casual, kind of flowing conversation and have a good, strong connection. But if you want to actually connect to a crowd, you need to amp up and project and just throw a ton of energy at them, right? If you're talking to a crowd of 1,000, you have to just be like a dynamo, just pouring energy into them in order to really connect, right? That scale is different because there's a distance, right? People get lost in the crowd. They don't feel as individually connected to you. It's the same kind of thing that happens online because there's so much context and so much distraction. And because you're seeing all of the people all facing the same way, there's not really differentiation so that you're looking at me particularly. I feel lost in a crowd in a similar way or more so, and there's less of a connection. And so you have to really amp it in order to really connect with people. That's exhausting.
Well,
that's what some of the challenges.
Everything James has said is true. I want to speak about it from the speaker's perspective for a second, because
go for it.
Speaking to an audience on Zoom is a different experience than speaking to a live audience. The live audience creates more fear because you're right in front of the hungry animal. You're standing up in front of the hungry animal, and it is a different experience, which means you have a different level of anxiety and you have to move through that. And I think somebody who started on Toastmasters in Zoom will have an interesting experience the first time they're up in front of a large live audience, because suddenly it's going to be way different from the 20 people in their Toastmasters club. On the other side of that, if a speaker wants to be effective and interact with the audience and keep the audience engaged, they have to do things differently. Some of the things work. Storytelling works. Humor still works. But you also need to use some of the tools that are available to you online. James is pretty good at asking the audience a question and having him answer it in the chat. I've also seen people use surveys and type things in. If you remember when I did my building presence workshop not half a year ago or so, we did the word cloud exercise.
Yep.
And that's a tool you can use to help keep the audience engaged. So one of the differences is the speaker experience. Another difference is the work the speaker has to go through to stay engaged with the audience.
I've also got a little interesting input because we've been hybrid for quite a while, but our room has been a boardroom with like 8 chairs max. And we have been growing with members who really only want to meet in person, if at all possible for them. And so we've gotten, because two of our new members actually are at the City of Lacey, we are able to get back into the City of Lacey community room that we were in post-COVID. And we had our first meeting last Thursday in that room. I was amazed at how nobody's voice carried.
Oh, yes. I noticed that when I came back in person, I'd forgotten how to project.
Well, and we've been in person, but in a small little boardroom size room.
Yep.
And
Same
so
prob-
here
yeah,
we
same
are in
problem.
the same room that we were in pre-COVID, and everybody was soft. And
Yeah.
and so that was one of the things that I really noticed, besides all of every time you're in a new hybrid location, you are refiguring out how are you going to see the people who are on Zoom? How is the camera going to be set up? All of these things we had to do every time. So I wound up doing a last minute speech, throw perfection out the window, which was perfect because the smart camera kept removing me from the.
Oh, man.
And so, but I think it's really going to be fun being back in our large room, partially because it is a room that we used to do our area contests in. And I've told everybody, if we get this room, we will have the home court advantage. And
Oh, I love it. I love it. You mentioned that about sizes of rooms and hybrid and microphones. That's something that, going back to being a speaker and the challenges with Zoom and so on, it's a different kind of skill set, because it's similar to the difference between presenting in the theater as acting in theater versus acting in cinema. Because in cinema, you have a close-up of the face, so the micro expressions of the face of the acting are really important, and the subtle nuances of the voice are really important. In theater, it's the big, grand, dramatic gestures that are able to be seen from the inside of the room, and you sing because that carries, right? That's how they did that, right? And so these are completely different art forms, almost or different kinds of poetry in a sense. And so I learned, when you're with a camera, you can lean up close and talk a bit quieter and everybody can hear what you're saying. But if you want to yell, you have to lean back from the camera or you're going to blast everybody's eardrums, right? Unless you have really good sound balancing stuff and all that kind of thing. But what's interesting is if you're hybrid, you have both. But you have to deal with that once, because you have to same screen for wherever the camera is. You have to keep the mic and adjust to that and still project, do the gestures and the face expressions. So you're giving two performances simultaneously to two different audiences. It's weird, but really challenging.
Yeah.
But cool. If you can pull it off, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But that's the big challenge we've seen is that hybrid is harder than either 100% online or 100% in person.
Yes.
Because of things like that. Yeah. But other than the fact that just when you're doing a breakout room or you're having discussions, the people online just get forgotten because there's that dichotomy.
It's talking about another club, but one of the lessons I learned from Sound Advice that I really treasure is before COVID hit, Sound Advice was hybrid. But it was most of the people in the room with 4 or 5 people gathering online to attend. And we had to figure out, Sound Advice has a lot of workshops, a lot of audience involvement exercises, facilitated groups, breaking into groups, things like that. And we had to figure out how to do that with an unknown number of people who are going to be online and an unknown number of people in the room. And we worked the kinks out of that, and it meant that whoever was in the meeting had to think about it. And it was,
I was one of those online members who was one of the gigs.
You were, and we managed to include you sufficiently so that you decided to join.
Though I remember that was mostly because you snookered me into giving a speech and they said, "Oh, now you have to join." I was like, "Oh, darn it!" But and then ended up being president later on. It's hilarious how that goes. But one of the things I know is one of those meetings, and I remember this distinctly, and really kind of shows how little things can make a difference in hybrid meetings. Initially, you were in one room and you had this massive screen that was up above everybody.
Yep.
And that's where the people who are visiting were on online. And they're kind of looking down. That's where the camera was too. They were kind of looking down on the whole table. It was like some kind of like security camera for the Oval Office or something. And watching everybody and like engaging. And every once in a while people would look up at you and talk at you and like go back and so on. It was kind of weird, right?
Yep.
But it worked. Right? It worked. But then there was somebody else was using that room. You had to use a different room in the interim, and you adjusted to another space. And that one had the monitor at the end of the table, eye level with everybody else. And suddenly I was more naturally and frequently included in conversations.
Yeah.
I felt like I was sitting there at the table with everybody else.
Yeah.
There was more of a connection. It was more organic and natural. There was less work invested in reaching out and connecting and pulling me in, which guys, you did a great job connecting with me before that point. I'm not faulting that. But the difference in the experience was so dramatically different just because something was raised from up here down to here and made human-sized, human-leveled, eye level with humans. That was huge. Astonishing how much of an impact it made.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have to admit, when I was doing an area directory visit report for a club via Zoom, I got special permission. Back when we had to do a special permission to visit a club via Zoom, all the way from the top of TI, like, I suppose we'll allow it this once. But that's all they had was this massive wall-size screen. So I was like the face of God looking down on them all with judgment, and it was great. In some context, it's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
How did TI react to the whole pandemic?
They were pretty quick to try and get some standard operating procedures out, but we kind of ignored them because they didn't make sense.
Yeah.
At least to me.
The thing they did do, which I liked, was when the CDC said, you have to stay home, you have to keep distance, you have to stop going to meetings, that TI went, okay, fine. Your in-person meetings are gone. But then they left it up to us to figure it out.
What to do with that?
They did eventually come up with a deal with Zoom for a discount.
Yeah, that was helpful.
Which is nice. They didn't have it initially, but it didn't matter to us because our district had enough money in the bank. They just bought 7 Zoom accounts and handed them out to one to every division.
Yep.
So,
yep. Which worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I think it was the Zoom masters who made that recommendation to the district council.
I think it might have been. Yeah, because I know we made the decision to go with Zoom versus GoToMeeting, if I remember right.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of our first meetings, there's a lot of competing video conferencing platforms out there. We need to pick one, and that's going to be the one. And we compared and analyzed, and I think we had a spreadsheet involved somewhere in there. And we, of course,
Who knew?
A spreadsheet, hand puppets,
right? They pop up every once in a while. If there was an official one, I know I had one on my computer where I was taking notes. But who else takes notes on a spreadsheet? But and we made the right choice, obviously. Like Zoom dominated the industry pretty quickly, and they were actively developing and innovating and creating content and updating innovatively, and their level of capacity for handling the server load, like that was what we were afraid of, because if everybody picked the same one and they weren't able to handle the scaling, it was going to die and everybody was going to go kaput. That can kill a lot of companies, is having to scale like that so fast. They did an admirable job. I am still impressed by how well they were able to handle that huge scale. So yeah, kudos to Zoom.
If you remember when we started out, every once in a while we'd be like, okay, we're getting some network problems. Everybody turn off your video except for the speaker.
Oh.
And when was the last time you had to do that?
Well, Zoom completely changed the way they did things, or early on, they adapted it so that they pre-process all the videos and send it as a single thing. So it actually didn't make a difference how many cameras were on or off. And they handled their loads balancing things, because that was actually a Teams thing. I've actually found out about this recently. Early in COVID, there was a massive in-house Teams meeting in Microsoft, and the keynote speaker, who was like one of like the C-suite gals in Microsoft or something like that, was on Teams, and there were hundreds of people on the call. And it got so overloaded that her video and audio crapped out in the middle of her keynote. So they had to tell everybody to turn off all of their cameras and everything so that she could come back on again. And it worked, right? Yep. Teams later fixed that. So they stole a page from Zoom's playbook there.
Yep.
But ever since then, Teams has had a camera off policy and a culture for that, which I think is sad, because that really makes it hard to stay engaged.
So I have to jump in here. I was invited about 2-3 weeks ago. I was giving a talk at the NVIDIA Toastmaster Club.
Oh, the NVIDIA Toastmasters Club.
Yes, yes.
Wow.
And they wanted me to come and talk on humor in the workplace.
Oh.
So great. I was going to have a funny talk.
The perfect purpose for that.
On how to do humor in the workplace. And this is a twist off my decoding humor speech. And it never occurred to me. So I was told a couple of days beforehand that they use Teams. Fine, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I got on it a day ahead of time so we could see how things played. Okay, fine. It never occurred to me to ask whether they had any type of video on, video off policy.
Mm-hmm.
NVIDIA does the same thing Microsoft does. Unless you're speaking, unless there's a reason for you to be on the screen, you keep your video off. Now, It's hard to do humor on Zoom because people are muted and you can't hear the laughter, and the audience laughter can't feed on itself. So what used to get huge laughs in a room gets smiles and maybe a chuckle on a screen. And when their video is off, you get nothing. You get no visual feedback at all as to whether you are being successful or not. And that was one of the most painful talks I have done in a long time.
I can imagine. Yeah. That is one of the things, is comedy is very difficult to get, because it's a collaborative process. It's a conversation between you and the audience. And that's so much of what I tell people, particularly beginning speakers, that, the way you walk to the lectern is how you begin your speech, and you're making a promise of energy to the audience. They're going to expect the energy. And when you arrive at the lectern, you're going to look out and you're going to have a crowd of expectant people waiting on you to fulfill that promise. And that's going to energize you to actually deliver on that energy. Right? If you give them a different energy, like an energy of depression and despair and terror, that's what they're going to give you. And that's what's going to happen. Right? But if you give them like, wow, awesome, amazing, that's what's going to happen. Zoom doesn't have a coming to the lectern kind of thing like that.
Yep.
It's what you look like while the person's introducing you, looking into the camera. And there's that bit of a jagger between like spotlighting and pinning and getting you situated and then making sure your mic's on. And all of these. One thing that kills the most momentum is when you start an impassioned, amazingly crafted opening, and then somebody goes, your mic's not on. You're like, crap.
Or you start that amazing opening and you get, the recording has been started.
Yes, I hate that. That's even worse. Like, no. They'd like stop and then, okay, start back over again.
Yep.
Kills the naturalness of it. So there's so many of these weird little things that seem small but add up to a lot of challenges. But the thing is, once you're familiar with them, you can overcome them. You can work through them. It takes that extra work, but you can do it. And it's funny now, having used it so much and how easy so many things, like creating breakout rooms, I can do that in my sleep, right? there is a guy, like one of my coaches, I helped him facilitate a networking meetup where he has a lot of breakout rooms. You're sending people all over different places. And he gave me like a $300 a month discount on his coaching just to run that for him. And I'm like, I can do that in my sleep like this. I'm a Toastmaster. This is what I do at Nerdmasters all the time, right? So Nerdmasters paid for itself just with that particular thing. But being able to just casually, easily, under pressure, like run a meeting while doing breakout rooms and managing the chat and taking people out of the waiting room and do it all at once without breaking a sweat just comes with practice, like being familiar with it, knowing what to do, what button to hit, that kind of stuff, knowing when things change. And I was just in a meeting. It was a presentation by somebody the other day, and he was so inept with Zoom. I'm like, man, did he miss COVID? Like completely? Like he had no clue how to do anything. And it was like the most basic stuff. It was, and he was like disconcerted by so many different things. And like, I was like, wow, this is impressive how bad this is. I mean, I love the content and everything like that, but it was astonishing. And I was like, wow, there's still people who haven't figured it out yet.
Yep.
But it just takes a little bit. It just takes a little bit of effort, a little bit of work to really connect to it, make it happen.
Still people who put their talk together, slides, whatever they're going to use, and then they don't practice it with the tech.
Mm.
Oh, I know how to do my talk. I'm going to show up and the tech's different. We're almost to 8 o'clock. I don't know how long we're going, but
yeah, I'll probably wrap it up around now.
I want to point out something. We've been talking about details of presenting online, presenting on Zoom, presenting in person, and the subtleties and some of the lessons we've learned. And you could learn this in any club.
Yeah.
But I think it's the nature of the people in Nerdmasters that we think about it. We look at it and go,
yeah,
how can I make that better? How can I make that better? You know?
Yeah. What can I do with that?
I cook at home, and when I put the food on the table, supper, and I'm asking my wife and my sister-in-law who lives with us, how do you like it? How can I make it better? And my dad, before he died, who used to come over and have supper with us, he looked at us like, well, he didn't understand the conversation. You know, my mother never invited a critical comment on her cooking or how to improve it.
Yeah.
He doesn't understand, you know, that I would present food and then want the eater's opinion on how I can make it better.
Mm-hmm.
We do the same thing here, only it's about communication and tech and how they work together.
Yeah.
And then that is, I think, for me, what the heart of Nerdmasters was we were looking at that intersection of technology with communication and leadership.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
I wish we'd had a little bit more time to look at the leadership part.
Yeah, one of the
leadership online is a whole nother thing. Yeah.
And one of the things I've noticed is that Toastmasters is kind of scratching the surface with regards to leadership. I've been learning a little bit and going, oh, well, that's interesting. It's a whole new can of worms that is much broader than the strokes that we get from Toastmasters.
Yeah,
But
Toastmasters provides a space within which to experiment.
Yeah.
And that's what I really bring into it. It's not about the curriculum. The curriculum is you get what you pay for, which is almost nothing. But it provides you a common framework for a community that has this kind of culture that Kyle's talking about to be able to grow and learn and self-coach and improve, right? If you have quality people who are out in the world bringing in resources and ideas and giving speeches about, you know, Sigma 6 and whatnot, all these massive, you know, management systems and whatnot. Somebody have a black belt Sigma 6 guy comes in and gives, you know, a 5-hour marathon training in Toastmasters. Everybody go to sleep. But you can have
the Sigma 6 people.
Right. But you have this opportunity to take these and incorporate them in an interesting way, to experiment and test and try this out, because that's what Toastmasters is supposed to be, is a sandbox, a playground. A place for us to fail safely. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly that. And I think Nerdmasters highlighted that and kind of reintroduced a bit of that culture into Toastmasters. And I think that spirit can live on in more clubs than just Toastmasters, than just Nerdmasters. I think if more clubs captured that spirit of play, experimentation, and asking for constructive feedback on how they're doing the thing, not just how they're presenting the thing from a tech perspective, from every dimension, that'll make Toastmasters exponentially more impactful.
And that's probably a great place to put it, because that's, I think, one of our main goals here is to make Toastmasters better.
Yep.
Joyce has been with us for a while. I probably should have mentioned that I have a co-host, sort of, but she's been supportive, giving me the thumbs up. Joyce, is there anything you'd like to add before we?
I agree with everything they say, except I haven't had to look up any words that James had spoken.
Okay. Well, you've been our president for a while now. You've listened to him for a while, so our next episode.
Therapy.
Yeah. Our next episode is going to be on the club itself and what we did. What kind of things did we do? How did we fare? What kind of wins and highlights and just funny things that happened and things that we did and how it grew.
And that we almost did, but decided not to against our better judgment.
Yeah, exactly. The stories that we have that I think are plenty and a plethora of stories with regards to how many years have we been doing it?
2.5,
3,
2.5, 3 years,
3.5, 3,
almost 3 years,
somewhere around there.
yeah.
Roughly.
So,
we started working on chartering in the summer of 2020. So 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd again like to thank Joyce for being my support and helping me out and being my co-host. Even though, well, with all these people here, it's hard to keep them from not talking. So we had a great episode.
You put Kyle and me in a room, you don't need much of a prompt.
Talking?
We'll suck the air out of any room, right, James?
Right.
Anyway, I'd like to end this episode with thanks a lot for coming, and hope you enjoyed.
Whether you identify as a gamer, technology nut, or just have a commitment to studying how technology is changing and improving both leadership and communication, our Nerd Herd has a place for you. Find out more about us at our website, nerdmasters.org. Join us the first Wednesday of each month at 7 o'clock Pacific, and get to know us before our meeting starts promptly at 7:30. You will visit our club and enjoy it.
Resistance is futile.
Game over.